Economics, Unit 4, Microeconomics, American Business in Action. Unit Overview. The 3 chapters in Unit 4 discuss finance and production, marketing and distribution, and the role of labor in producing goods. Chapter 10 explains or describes investment financing, types of financing for business, and the production process. Chapter 11 explains how goods are marketed and describes how goods are distributed from producer to consumer. Chapter 12 describes the American labor force and discusses management and labor relations. Chapter 10, Financing and Producing Goods. In 1936, Congress passed the U.S. Flood Control Act, which stated that the benefits of all flood control projects must outweigh the cost of the projects themselves. This was the first time that the government used the process of cost-benefit analysis, which had been developed by E.J. Dupuy, a French engineer, in 1844. What might be the cost associated with a flood control project? What might be the benefits? Why is it important to include the cost of loans when doing a cost-benefit analysis? If you were an entrepreneur, you would face many hurdles on your road to success. One hurdle would be finding sufficient financing to pay for the company's current needs, such as parts and tools, and its long-term needs, such as growth. Financing is the obtaining of funds or money capital. In this section, you will learn that both the short-term and the long-term needs of businesses can be financed in a variety of ways. Turning savings into investments. Financing business operations and growth is an important part of the free enterprise system. People deposit funds into financial institutions, which makes these funds available to businesses. The movement of these funds creates economic growth and expansion. Figure 10.1, Financing Business Expansion. Businesses are able to obtain financing because you and other income earners do not spend all that they earn during a year. Through saving, you and others who make resources available to finance business expansion in the United States. Before you pursue financing, cost-benefit analysis is weighing your cost against the benefits. This is an important step before you would pursue financing. So in order to do a cost-benefit analysis, you would estimate the costs of expansion. You would calculate your expected income. And then you would calculate your expected profits. You would also have to calculate the cost of loans and undertake any activity up to the point at which the additional benefit equals or exceeds the additional cost. So let's say, for example, you had a business, and let's say you decided to expand to a second location. You would have to estimate what would it cost you to open this new location, including your interest cost. And then you would have to calculate what your revenue from this new location would be and calculate the difference. And of course, it should lead to an increase in revenue. So looking at step 1, considering the costs that you may face if you expand your business. They may include renting new stores or possibly buying property, training new workers, Additional bookkeeping may be necessary. The opportunity cost of your time to check on new shops. Electricity and other utilities. Additional insurance may be necessary. You might have possible new taxes and meeting government regulations as well as carrying additional inventory. Step 2, of course, would be to calculate your expected revenues. Then step 3 is to calculate your expected profits, which once again should be the differences between your expenses and your revenues. So step 4 is to calculate how much the loan plus interest will cost you monthly. And step 5, your expected profits should outweigh the cost of expansion. Why people are willing to finance investment. People who finance investment seek rewards, such as interest earned on a loan, dividends from the stock, or a personal stake in the company. In some cases, the same individual is both the borrower and the lender. Resources go where they generate the highest expected value. So businesses compete for scarce financial resources. In other words, if you are trying to expand your business and you are looking for financial investors, you have to compete with other businesses who are also trying to lure in those same investors. And there are many types or many methods of financing that are available, including bonds, stocks, loans, and the internet. Do you think that internet financing will become larger than traditional bank financing in the future? Why or why not? Small businesses provide 67% of workers with their first jobs and initial on-the-job training in basic skills. Since 1953, the U.S. Small Business Administration, or SBA, has provided financial, technical, and management assistance to help Americans start and grow their businesses. With a portfolio of business loans, loan guarantees, and disaster loans worth more than $45 billion, the SBA is the nation's largest single financial backer of small business. What kinds of financing are available to businesses? Businesses, like individuals, must undergo a certain process when borrowing funds. A business that wants to borrow must show credit worthiness by undergoing a credit check. A credit rating of good, average, or poor is then assigned to the business. Like an individual who borrows money, a business must pay interest on its loans and repay it within a stated period of time. In this section, you'll learn about the financing options from which businesses may choose. Debt financing is borrowing money to finance a business. There are 3 types of debt financing: short-term, intermediate term, and long-term financing. Short-term financing is when the term of the loan is less than 1 year, and this is generally used for short-term needs. Intermediate term financing is when the term of the loan is between 1 to 10 years, and this is used when a company wants to expand through land, buildings, or equipment. Long-term financing is when the term of the loan is longer than 10 years, and this is generally used for a major expansion. Choosing the right financing. Interest cost. The higher the interest rates make companies more likely to take out short-term loans in the hopes that interest rates will drop. So in other words, if you're in the business, if you're in a business or running a business where you're looking to expand, you have to consider what are the current interest rates. You may want to stick to shorter term financing if interest rates happen to be particularly high. You also need to consider the financial condition of the company. Is the company too indebted? Just like individuals can't afford to take on too much debt, a business cannot afford to take on too much debt either. Another important consideration is market climate. In other words, what is the climate in the market in which the business is in? In other words, what are the conditions? For example, there are certain businesses that might do very well during certain times and other businesses that may struggle during other times. If you were in a travel-related business, times when gas prices are particularly high might represent a difficult market climate because people may have a harder time affording to travel and thus would not be as likely to use your business. So if you're facing a tough market climate, that may not be a good time to expand. However, if the market climate is hot, an expansion may be very wise. You also have to consider control of the company. Sometimes the stockholders have to give approval before financing decisions can be made. Robotic arms equipped with a video camera are used to help paralyzed patients in their homes. These robots move around the house, respond to verbal commands from the owner, and perform simple tasks such as filling a glass of water. Is a robot used to help patients a capital or a consumer good? In the production process, what is the role of a capital good? After businesses obtain the necessary financing, they can begin production. Production is the process of changing resources into goods that satisfy the needs and the wants of the individuals and other businesses. Production also involves careful planning and getting raw materials from the suppliers on time. In this section, you'll learn about all of the steps in the production process. Consumer goods are sold directly to individuals as they are. Capital goods are used to make other goods. The first step is the planning step, choosing where to locate the business and how to get the product to the consumers, which of course involves scheduling. The second step is the purchasing step, which is obtaining the raw materials, the machines, and the supplies. Quality control is checking the quality of your products. And inventory control is taking an inventory of the materials that are used in production. Mechanization is the combining of the labor of people and the power of machines. The assembly line is where work is done or completed in steps as the product moves along a line, with workers performing generally the same simple repetitive task. The division of labor is the breaking down of jobs into smaller tasks. Automation. Automation is where machines do the work while people oversee. Robotics is complicated computer-controlled machinery used to operate assembly lines. Chapter 11, Marketing and Distribution. In 1962, a McDonald's franchise owner introduced the Filet-O-Fish sandwich. He noted that he was losing business on Fridays from Catholic customers, and he wanted to regain that business. What marketing activities brought the Filet-O-Fish sandwich to the consumer? what are form, place, time, and ownership utility? A typical visit to McDonald's adds to which of these utilities? Marketing. In addition to financing and producing a product, businesses must promote and eventually sell their products and services. Marketing involves all of the activities needed to move goods and services from the producer to the consumer. The sole purpose of marketing is to convince consumers that a certain product or service will add to their utility or satisfaction. Form utility is converting raw materials into desired/needed products. For example, if you were to take a hamburger, for example, let's say just a hamburger that you would get at a typical fast food restaurant. Well, if you went through the drive-thru and you ordered your hamburger, you would expect to receive a cooked hamburger that is fully assembled, ready to eat. If you were simply given a frozen hamburger patty and an untoasted bun, and then packets of your condiments, and you had to go home and cook your own burger, it would really not meet your form utility, as in it wouldn't be in the particular form that you wanted it in, which was the form ready to eat. Place utility is providing the good or the service where the consumer wants it to be. Another, of course, very important key piece. For example, here in Oakdale, if it's lunchtime and I happen to love In-N-Out Burger, I don't have the option of going to In-N-Out Burger during my lunch break because there is not an In-N-Out Burger located in Oakdale. So In-N-Out Burger does not meet my place utility while I'm at work. Time utility is providing the good or service at precisely the time that the customer wants it. I'm sure we've all been in a situation before where you went to a store only to discover that the store wasn't open when you got there. Time utility is having it available when you want it. Ownership utility is providing a good or service that people are pleased to own. Now, certainly, some products lend themselves more towards ownership utility. Typically speaking, people aren't very pleased to own consumables, things like toilet paper or paper towels or even their food items. These aren't the types of things that people want to take pride in necessarily. But people do take ownership or have ownership utility in things like their homes or their cars or even sometimes their clothes. Consumer sovereignty means that the role of the consumer as the ruler of the market when determining what goods, types of goods and services are produced. In other words, ultimately, we say that the consumer is sovereign, or the consumer really has the power. Because, now of course not an individual consumer, but collectively on the whole. Because a business is not going to waste their time making products that aren't going to sell very well, because that's not profitable for them to do so. Market research means gathering, recording, and analyzing data about the types of goods and services that people want. A market survey is a survey in which researchers gather information about the possible users of a product based on characteristics such as age, sex, income, education, and location. Generally what we would refer to as demographic information. Test marketing means offering a product for sale in a small area for a limited time to see how it sells before offering it nationally. Market research should be done before the product is made or the service is offered. The timing of market research, it should be done before, during production, such as when samples are being provided, and after the product or the service hits the market. Surveys gather information about who might buy the product. Testing new products means to offer the product or offer the item for sale in a small market before selling it to a large area. All of these are important elements for a business. For example, businesses might survey potential customers to determine whether or not they even have interest in the product that they are considering offering. If, of course, they see that people would not be interested, then it makes little sense to move forward and to take the risk of starting the business or expanding the business. In today's highly competitive world, simply producing a product and offering it for sale is not enough. Through their marketing departments, companies plan a marketing strategy which details how the company will sell the product effectively. In this section, you'll learn that a marketing strategy or plan combines the 4 P's of marketing: product, price, place, and promotion. Decisions about each are based on the data collected through the company's market research. Sometimes a corporation will start a secondary business under a different name. Both companies might actually sell similar products, but be marketed to different target groups. For example, Gap Incorporated created the company Old Navy, which also sells clothing. The marketing strategy to form 2 companies can almost always be traced back to the 4 P's of marketing. What are the 4 P's of marketing? Product. What good or service should be produced? What services should be offered with the product? Now, of course, some products aren't sold with services, but some are. For example, let's say you buy a new car. Well, what if the dealer offered, with the purchase of the new car, they, let's say, offered free oil changes for the first 2 years? Well, that would be a service that they've added on top of the vehicle to make the product more attractive. How should the product be packaged? Consider the size, the design, color, catchphrases, and coupons or rebates that could be used. How should the product be identified? Consider logos, songs, celebrity endorsements, and packaging. Additional services may be provided to help make a sale. Price. Price is determined by the law of supply and demand. Price leadership occurs when competing companies sell their products for similar prices. And of course, in many industries, we do in fact see this, where competing companies do have very similar prices for their products. Selling a new product for a low price to entice people to buy it is called penetration pricing. This is used when a company wants to penetrate a market, which is of course why they call it penetration pricing. The idea behind this is you have a new market, you want to establish yourself. And so you offer the product at a reduced price or a low price so that people will be willing to take a chance. After people see that they like the product, you're hoping that they will be willing to pay a higher price in the future, and so that you could follow suit with moving the price to be more in line with that of competitors. Place. Where should the product be sold? You may have heard the expression, location, location, location. Depending upon the product, location can be vital. Past experience with similar products will help the marketing department make this decision. Promotion. Promotion, or informing the customers about the product or the service. You need to consider which type of promotion would be best. The type of promotion depends upon the product, the target customer, and the amount of money that the company wants to spend. For example, if you're starting a business on a shoestring budget, you may have to get very creative with finding ways to market your product and what type of promotion you will use to find ones that are low cost. However, if you've got a big budget, then you may use several different means to get the word out about your new product. Examples of promotions include direct mail advertising. That's the type of promotion that uses a mailer, usually including a letter and an order form. You might use free samples or cents off coupons or rebates. You also have to consider the product's life cycle. The product life cycle is a series of stages from its first introduction to complete withdrawal from the market. Marketing programs are different for each stage. Pricing can be different at each stage. Marketers try to extend the life of a product by changing its looks, its uses, and the advertising focus. So keep in mind that every product has a life cycle. Some products have a very long life cycle, which means they don't really have to be recreated. They just remain in pretty high demand without a lot of changes. Other products, on the other hand, do require updates. One example I've seen is I've seen several shoe companies. For me, myself as a longtime wrestling coach, I've seen your major producers of wrestling shoes oftentimes come out with a new model of shoe that has new features, but they offer it initially in some very limited color options, maybe only one or two color combinations. But after the shoe has been on the market for a year, they oftentimes update the product by re-releasing the same shoe in new, different color combinations. Now, in doing so, this helps to extend the life cycle, because as where people may be tired of the shoe after only 1 year on the market, when they release the shoe in new updated colors, many more people will buy in the new updated colors. And then sometimes they'll come out with a different version a few years down the road, and usually the different version will just contain a few updates that will just slightly change the product. But once again, as they do this, they are extending the life cycle of the product. Decisions about distribution or moving goods from where they are produced to the people who will buy them is another function of marketing. In this section, you will learn about the channels of distribution, or the routes by which goods are moved. So here you can take a look at some of the typical channels of distribution. Sometimes you may have products that are sold directly from the manufacturer to the consumer. You can also have products that are sold from the manufacturer to a retailer to a consumer. In this case, the retailer becomes the middleman. The manufacturer makes the product, sells it to the retailer, who in turn adds a markup to the product and then sells it to the end consumer. Another possible distribution channel could be from manufacturer to wholesaler to retailer to consumer. And in this case, you have two middlemen. The manufacturer is going to make the product, sell it to a wholesaler who will mark up the product, selling it for more than what they paid, and then selling it to a retailer who will sell it once again, marking it up again to the consumer. Now, of course, the reason why we refer to the retailer and the wholesaler as middlemen is because they're each going to take their cut. The retailer is going to mark up the product to a higher cost to include their profit, and the wholesaler will also do the same. As where if you eliminate the middleman, the manufacturer could actually make more by selling directly to the consumer, potentially, and the consumer could actually pay a lower price and still complete the transaction. But once again, it depends a little bit upon what type of business that they're in and what would be most appropriate for their business. If we looking at raw materials, you can have raw materials being sold from the producer directly to a business who will use them, or another model there would be the producer sells to a wholesaler who in turn sells to the business. Montgomery Ward and Company, Incorporated, began as a mail order catalog in 1872. Their first catalog was only one sheet long. Over the next few years, the catalog expanded and the company began to offer more products. Just 16 years later, the company's annual sales were $1 million. What are the channels of distribution used by a mail order catalog like Montgomery Ward? Would Montgomery Ward be considered a retailer or a wholesaler? Wholesalers and retailers. Wholesalers sell goods to retailers but not to consumers. Now, of course, the exception here would be what we like examples of stores like Costco, who are kind of both wholesale and retail. Retailers sell their goods directly to the public. Full-service wholesalers warehouse the goods and then deliver them after the retailers pay for them. Drop shippers are wholesalers that buy the goods under the condition that the producer will store and ship the goods after the wholesaler has sold them. Now, of course, there's actually some retail establishments that work kind of on the drop shipping basis as well. But the same concept applies when the consumer places the order. The producer ships directly to the consumer, and so that the retailer never actually has to store any inventory. They just basically process the sale. A cash and carry wholesaler sells merchandise, but the buyer must pay the shipping. A truck wholesaler sells and delivers at the same time. Why do you think wholesalers do not sell their products to the general public? Storage and transportation. Storing goods for future sales. Moving goods from producers and or sellers to the buyers. These are things that have to be taken into consideration. If you're running a retail business, for example, where are you going to store your goods that you're selling? Are you going to simply put them all out on the sales floor, or are you going to have inventory that's stocked away and can be brought out as needed? How are you going to get your products from the producers and or the sellers to the buyers? You have to consider the type. In other words, what type of product are you talking about? If you're talking about a food product, for example, you have to be concerned about spoilage. And does it require refrigeration? You have to consider the size, the weight of the good, and once again, how fast it is needed. All of those factor into the storage and transportation decisions. Warehouse club shopping lets people buy a limited number of models and brands in huge quantities so that the warehouse will get favorable prices from manufacturers. Direct marketing is done through catalogs, the internet, and space ads. E-commerce is business transactions that are conducted over computer networks, particularly the internet. Some food companies offer grocery shopping on the internet. Do you think that this will ever replace the grocery store? Why or why not? Chapter 12, the American Labor Force. Everyone from a factory worker to the president of a corporation belongs to the productive resource known as labor. In this section, you'll learn how workers are categorized, how wages are determined, and why employers need to pay more to get and keep good workers. In 1950, 59% of non-farm jobs were in service-producing businesses. In the 1970s, it was 67%. By 2005, the figure was projected to rise to 82%. Who comprises the civilian labor force? How is it changing? What are the various skill levels? The civilian labor force. The civilian labor force is the total number of people 16 years or older who are employed or are seeking work. People not included in the civilian labor force include the mentally and physically disabled, prisoners, people in the armed forces, and those not looking for a paying job. So once again here, the key word, if we look at this, is civilian. That tells us that it doesn't include the military. Those in the armed forces are not civilian by definition. The mentally or physically disabled really aren't included because we're assuming people here that their disability prevents them from really being able to work. Prisoners, because once again, due to being incarcerated, really can't work. And then once again, those people who are not looking for a paying job. For example, if people, let's say somebody is a full-time student, well, they're not really going to count if they're not trying to find a full-time job. If their full-time responsibility is going to school, they're not really a part of the civilian labor force because they're not looking to be a part of the civilian labor force. Figure 12.1 looks at the employment status of the United States population. The number of people age 16 or older who are not in the civilian labor or not in the labor force is not the same as the nation's unemployment rate. Why? Let's take a look at the breakdown. Here you can see the civilian labor force accounts for approximately 66.2%, with the unemployed making up about 4.2%, and then you have the armed forces making up 0.6%, and then you've got several groups that are not in the labor force, which is about 33.2%, but those groups can be broken down into subgroups. 3.4% for the disabled, 10.9% keeping house. That would be like stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home dads, or even if they're not a parent, but they choose to be supported by a spouse or a significant other. You have people that are retired. That accounts for 10.7%. Those that are in school, 4.6%. And 4.5% is other, which basically means they don't fall into any of these other categories, but they are also not in the labor force. So, let's take a look at categories of workers. Workers can be categorized according to the type of work that they do. Examples would include blue collar, such as craft workers, manufacturers, and non-farm laborers. White collar, such as office workers, salespeople, and highly trained workers. And service workers, who are people who provide services directly to individuals. Workers can also be classified according to skill level. Unskilled means they have no specialized training. Semi-skilled, which means they require some training. Skilled, which means they have learned a trade or a craft. And professionals, which means they have college degrees and sometimes additional training. Many professionals do not fall neatly into a category. For example, a teacher could be considered both a white-collar professional and a service worker. Consider the professions that your family members or friends hold. Factors that affect wages include the skill level, the type of job, and the location. The lack of information about other employers or employees, minimum wage laws that set a minimum hourly wage for certain types of employees, and wage negotiations between unions and the management can lead to restrictions on wages. The first known labor strikes occurred in 1768. Journeymen tailors went on strike in New York City to protest a cut in their wages. What are labor unions? What does their existence say about the power of the individual worker? The development of labor unions. In the 1800s, working conditions were terrible and unions were often illegal. Strikes often resulted in violence between workers and the police. The first permanent union, the American Federation of Labor, or AFL, was made up of craft unions, unions that are made up of skilled workers in a specific trade or industry, and it was led by Samuel Gompers. In 1938, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO, was created, and the automobile and steel industries were the first to be organized. The AFL and the CIO joined forces in 1955 because they felt greater gains could be made if the craft and industrial unions Unions made up of workers in an industry, regardless of skill level, worked together. So they formed the AFL-CIO. A strike is a deliberate work stoppage to force employers to give in to the workers' demands. Here we can see some different strikes in the past that became violent. For example, we have in 1892 the Homestead Massacre, also sometimes referred to as the Homestead Strike, where steelworkers that went on strike to protest a wage cut, and 13 people were killed in the violence. Also, the same year in 1892, a silver mine unrest. Miners strike to protest a wage cut, and the state jails more than 1,000 workers in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Here you've got the sugarcane workers strike. State militia breaks the strike, killing 30 people, mostly African Americans. In 1894, the Pullman strike. About 14,000 troops attacked striking railroad workers, killing 30. That happened in Pullman, which is a town named after George Pullman, who made the sleeping cars for trains. Today it's a neighborhood of Chicago. And also in Chicago in 1896, the Haymarket Affair. A bomb explodes at a labor rally, killing 7 police officers, and the police fire into the crowd, killing 10. 1902, the anthracite coal strike. About 140,000 miners strike to win union recognition. And in 1912, a textile strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts. The police beat 40 strikers' hungry children. How unions are organized. Local unions have members in a distinct location, such as one factory, company, or geographical area. Local union membership and management relationships differ from one shop to another. Closed shops allow the company to hire only union workers. These were outlawed in 1947. Union shops require employees to join the union after a specific period of time. Agency shops require employees to pay union dues whether or not they join the union. National unions represent the local unions nationwide. Those that include members from Canada and Mexico are known as international unions. National unions send in organizers to help set up local unions and to negotiate contracts, sometimes for whole industries. At the federation level of unions is the AFL-CIO, which is made up for national and international unions. Right to work laws are state laws that forbid unions from forcing workers to join or pay union dues. When you look at this map, you can see the states shaded in green have right to work laws. Federal employees cannot strike. Any kind of strike or halting of work by federal employees was outlawed by the Labor Management Relations, or Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. The government, therefore, has the right to intervene and cease all strikes that occur, as President Reagan did to the air traffic controller strike in 1981. Besides striking, what are some of the other ways for laborers to express dissatisfaction? Collective bargaining is the process by which unions and employers negotiate the conditions of employment. At the center of the collective bargaining process is compromise. The company wants to keep wages and benefits low to hold its labor costs down and to remain competitive in the market. The union wants to increase wages and benefits for its members as much as possible. Now, of course, this puts them naturally at odds. Now, at the same time, there are sometimes other areas where it's possible to engage in what is known as interest-based bargaining. In interest-based bargaining, both parties work to try to meet the other's needs and arrive at a win-win situation. But when it comes to money, usually interest-based bargaining kind of falls apart because both sides really end up being forced more or less into opposite positions. Negotiations. Labor and management meet to discuss contract issues. Mediation takes place when labor and management cannot agree or become hostile. Instead, they find a neutral person to try to help them reach an agreement. Arbitration takes place when mediation fails. Labor and management then ask a third party to make a decision, agreeing to unconditionally accept that decision. Picketing is when workers carry signs in front of the place of business until their needs are satisfactorily met in the contract. Lockouts are when management prevents workers from returning to work until a new contract is signed. Strike breakers, or scabs, are people who fill in for striking workers. Injunctions are court orders that limit picketing or prevent a strike from continuing or occurring at all. Here you can see some statistics over the years from 1950 through 2001, and what we have represented on this graph are the number of strikes that took place that involved at least 1,000 workers or more. So you can see in 1950 there were more than 400 strikes involving 1,000 workers or more. That number dropped to just a little over 200 by 1960. By 1970, it had shot back up to just under 400, dropped back down to less than 200 by 1980, dropped more by 1990, and even further by the year 2001. And this is largely due to the fact that over the last several decades, the United States has moved more and more into the service sector and are manufacturing a lot less goods than we used to. That reduction in manufactured goods has resulted in less union jobs, and thus fewer union strikes. As working conditions have improved over the years, non-union workers see little benefit to belonging to a union. More jobs are available in white-collar and service sectors. Blue-collar jobs are decreasing. Critics of the labor movement claim that unions are so large that they are not in touch with the members' needs, and increased wages given to union workers are passed on to consumers in price increases. Employers claim union rules decrease productivity. Unions make it hard to use new technology that would replace workers, and corruption among labor leaders has damaged union reputation. And here on this graph you can see the decline of unions from 1940. They actually increased between 1940 and 1945, dropped off between 45 and 50, picked back up a little bit between 50 and 55, and then have pretty steadily decreased, a fairly level decrease through 1975, and then it continued downward, leveling off a little bit through 2001, but you can see union membership has declined dramatically from where it was in 1940.